The morning air over Europe was crisp, a pale sun struggling to burn through the lingering fog. Yet for the German pilots lined up on the tarmac, there was an almost casual arrogance, a sense of superiority bred from years of dominance in the skies. They had seen countless new American aircraft, new designs that promised innovation, and yet they had grown accustomed to scoffing, to dismissing the fledgling attempts of the Allied air forces as mere paper planes, toys in the face of their seasoned Luftwaffe experience. And then came the P-47 Thunderbolt, a machine that looked at first glance ungainly, a hulking frame of metal, enormous radial engine, wings wide enough to cast shadows over entire airfields, yet carrying itself with a surprising balance that belied its bulk. The Germans laughed. They said, "This will never maneuver, never climb fast enough to matter. Just another fat American fighter to shoot down." Yet those who had scoffed would soon learn that the Thunderbolt was no ordinary fighter, and the laughter that morning would become a memory soaked in fire and lead. As the Thunderbolts taxied down the runway, engines rumbling with a deep, almost predatory growl, the pilots gripping their controls felt the vibrations through their fingers, felt the air bending around the massive propeller, and sensed something electric in the atmosphere, something that defied calculation, an instinctive understanding that this was more than metal and oil. The plane's fuselage gleamed in the pale sunlight, reflecting the German insignias on the distant enemy fields as if mocking them silently, a silent promise of what was to come. Inside the cockpit, the Americans ran through checklists that had been drilled into them over months of preparation, but this was no ordinary day. Today they carried more than ammunition. They carried the weight of every airman who had died in earlier skirmishes, every plane lost to mistakes, every dogfight that had ended in bitter frustration. And they carried it in the P-47, a machine designed not merely to fight, but to dominate, to turn arrogance into terror. The takeoff was smooth, yet commanding. The Thunderbolt lifted from the ground with a power that seemed almost unnatural, wings flexing under the stress, absorbing each gust of wind, each puff of turbulence, the radial engine roaring in a voice that was both warning and challenge. German pilots watched with incredulity as the massive fighter climbed with speed and precision, outpacing lighter, supposedly more agile aircraft, and weaving through the sky with a grace that contradicted its size. The early moments of engagement were deceptively calm, the clouds rolling lazily across the horizon. Yet within minutes, the Thunderbolts engaged. 8 50-caliber guns poised to unleash torrents of fire. German pilots, initially amused, now tightened their grips on controls, hearts racing as the first rounds tore through the air, the tracers streaking like fiery serpents against the pale sky. And suddenly the laughter ended. Every maneuver, every dive, every climb of the Thunderbolt revealed a truth that had been carefully engineered, yet seemed almost miraculous in execution. The plane could absorb punishment that would cripple other fighters, its armor protecting pilots against small-caliber fire, its air-cooled radial engine shrugging off flak that would have grounded others, and its sheer firepower raining destruction across the enemy formations. German aces, those who had prided themselves on their agility and precision, now faced a machine that defied expectation. They tried to turn, to gain an angle, only to find the Thunderbolt adjusting effortlessly, guns blazing, precision honed by training, technology, and the quiet audacity of its designers. In those moments, the sky itself seemed to convulse under the barrage, tracers intersecting, aircraft twisting in evasive maneuvers. And yet the Thunderbolt remained steady, unrelenting, a symbol of calculated wrath. As the engagement intensified, the psychological toll became as lethal as the physical. German pilots began to see the threat not as a machine, but as inevitability. Each attack forced them to question their assumptions, to reevaluate everything they had believed about air combat. The Thunderbolt's heavy frame, once derided, now became a fortress impervious to panic and chaos. Its guns, each capable of delivering devastating firepower, synchronized in a deadly rhythm, cutting through formations with efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. The Luftwaffe's pride and confidence, built over years, eroded with each burst of tracers. Each descending plane and the air, once familiar and commanding to them, became a theater of fear. Even as the first skirmish ended, the impact of the P-47's presence was undeniable. Pilots reported back, hands trembling, eyes wide, voices tight with disbelief, describing in detail how a single plane, so massive, so seemingly unwieldy, could dominate, destroy, and survive. Intelligence officers began to reconsider tactics, engineers took notes, and the whispered legend of the Thunderbolt began to spread from base to base. Yet for those who had flown it, the experience was more than tactical success. It was a visceral revelation, a demonstration that courage, calculation, and the audacity to build beyond expectation could turn the tide of the skies. The hook of that first encounter and the awe, the tension, the disbelief set the stage for the coming campaigns, the P-47 proving in brutal clarity that the era of laughing at the American fighter was over. In the aftermath, the smoke of battle lingered and the Germans retreated, counting losses that had come not from stealth or numbers, but from design, innovation, and disciplined execution. Every ace who survived would carry the image of that hulking Thunderbolt, the way it cut through the clouds, the way its guns roared, and the way the impossible seemed for a moment tangible. And for the Americans, every pilot knew that the legend had only begun. The first minute of engagement, the first seconds of awe, would echo across every subsequent mission, shaping strategy, morale, and the understanding that the P-47 Thunderbolt was not just a plane. It was a harbinger, a declaration that the skies had changed forever. The sky over Europe trembled with tension. A pale blue canvas soon streaked with the distant contrails of approaching enemy fighters. German pilots, hardened by countless victories and confident in their superior agility, spotted the incoming formation of P-47 Thunderbolts and, as they had before, allowed themselves a laugh. Amused at what they presumed were lumbering, oversized American planes, slow, cumbersome, and easy prey for trained aces. Yet as the Thunderbolts drew nearer, the weight of their size became a misleading indicator of capability. Every aircraft moved with deliberate precision, engines vibrating with controlled ferocity, wings flexing under aerodynamic mastery, the sun glinting off fuselage armor that had been carefully calculated to withstand the bullets and shrapnel that would cripple lesser aircraft. American pilots gripped their controls, hearts steady but alert, fully aware of the historical significance of the moment, that each maneuver, each turn, each calculated attack might become a legend, a turning point, an answer to the countless sacrifices and innovations that had birthed this machine. As the formations closed, the Luftwaffe launched their first maneuvers confident in speed and agility, weaving through the sky with graceful rolls and sharp dives, intending to encircle the Thunderbolts and strike with their signature precision. For a moment, it seemed as if the Germans might succeed, as if the heavy Americans would be trapped in predictable arcs, their size a disadvantage in the vertical fight. Yet then the P-47s responded in ways that defied expectation. Engines roared, propellers carved invisible corridors through the air, and the wings, massive yet finely tuned, absorbed every gust, every turbulence flexing like living instruments, maintaining lift and control even as the planes twisted, turned, and adjusted to the most extreme maneuvers. The first burst of gunfire from the 50 caliber guns cracked the air with a ferocity that made even the most seasoned German pilot flinch, the tracers streaking across the blue sky with surgical precision, cutting through formations, tearing wings and fuselage alike with a relentlessness that was almost impossible to comprehend. As the engagement intensified, the Germans realized that the P-47 was more than just armored. It was intelligent in combat, every turn calculated, every climb and dive exploiting the limitations of enemy aircraft. The American pilots felt the rhythm of battle, each shot fired timed perfectly to maximize damage and minimize risk, their controls responding with uncanny responsiveness despite the weight of the plane. Enemy planes began to falter under the onslaught, wings shredded, engines smoking, pilots scrambling to evade the deadly hail. And yet the Thunderbolts seemed untouched, deflecting damage with sheer resilience, proving that size and firepower could combine to create a predator the sky had never known. The Luftwaffe's laughter had long vanished, replaced by shock, disbelief, and a creeping terror as the P-47s executed attacks from unexpected angles, diving steeply to unleash torrents of bullets, then climbing swiftly, disappearing into clouds to reappear moments later in a new position. Unstoppable, relentless, a machine designed not to be merely engaged, but to dominate. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. German pilots, trained to rely on skill, agility, and instinct, were forced to reconsider every assumption, every tactic, every maneuver they had once relied upon. What had been a fight of reflex and strategy had become a trial of endurance against a plane that turned every expectation upside down. The P-47s demonstrated that sheer courage paired with unmatched engineering could create a weapon whose presence alone altered the dynamics of the battle. Every German plane that fell was a lesson, not only in firepower, but in the terrifying truth that a new era of air combat had begun. The clouds themselves seemed to participate in the battle, funneling light across the thunderous streaks of tracers, casting shadows over shattered wings and flaming engines, transforming the sky into a cathedral of violence where legend was written in smoke and lead. By the end of the engagement, German formations had been decimated. Pilots descended in parachutes. Others spiraled into smoke-filled destruction, their once proud formation fractured and scattered across the horizon. The P-47s returned to base, engines ticking as they cooled, wings flexing back into stillness, fuselage scarred but unbroken, a testament to design, training, and strategy. Engineers and commanders poring over post-mission reports noted the unthinkable. A single type of plane, its guns, armor, and maneuverability combined, had turned conventional wisdom on its head. What had seemed impossible, that a heavy, seemingly slow aircraft could dominate the sky, was now a proven reality. For the pilots who flew them, there was a deep, unspoken reverence for their machines. They understood that each flight had been a demonstration of physics, psychology, and sheer will. Every German pilot who had mocked the Thunderbolt now carried the memory of its power like a scar across the sky. Every tracer streak, every smoke trail, every evasive maneuver that ended in destruction was a reminder that the P-47 was more than a fighter. It was a herald of dominance, an embodiment of ingenuity and courage that turned the battlefield into a stage where legends were not only born, but witnessed firsthand. And as the Thunderbolts landed, pilots climbing from their cockpits, dust settling around them, engines winding down, there remained a singular, palpable silence, the silence of awe, of respect, and of the growing legend that would echo through every Allied and enemy airfield for the rest of the war. The morning light stretched across the European skies like a pale veil, and yet beneath that seemingly serene horizon, chaos had begun to stir, the distant drumming of engines a harbinger of the storm to come. The Thunderbolts, massive yet agile, climbed steadily into the thermals, wings slicing through the air with a precision that seemed almost impossible for their size. German pilots, still reeling from the initial engagement, scrambled to regroup, their formations jagged, their confidence fraying, each man acutely aware that the lumbering American aircraft now represented a danger far beyond their prior calculations. The P-47s were not just fighters. They were predators born of science and strategy, engines humming like coiled serpents ready to strike, the fuselage gleaming with an almost sacred intensity under the first rays of sunlight. Every pilot knew instinctively that the rules had changed, that the very laws of engagement were being rewritten with each throttle push, each pull of a trigger, and each calculated dive into enemy formations. As the second engagement began, clouds became both adversary and ally, rolling in thick sheets that offered concealment while also testing the Thunderbolt's structural integrity. German pilots attempted their usual maneuvers, banking sharply, diving to gain speed, trying to use their acrobatics to exploit the perceived sluggishness of the American machines. Yet every tactic they employed was countered with near-prescient precision. The Thunderbolts twisted and turned, seemingly defying gravity, wings flexing under extreme loads, maintaining lift and stability with a grace that belied the plane's apparent bulk. The 850 caliber guns, synchronized with the pilot's nerves, erupted in torrents of fire, each burst tearing through enemy aircraft with a devastating regularity, leaving smoke trails and fragmented metal in their wake. Enemy formations began to fracture even before entering effective range. The mere presence of the P-47s forcing evasive maneuvers that slowed response times broke cohesion and made every pilot a target waiting to be struck. In the air, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Every roll, every bank, every dive was an interplay of speed, inertia, and strategic calculation. Pilots felt the subtle vibrations of the wings beneath their hands, flexing in response to sudden shifts in wind, torque, and acceleration, the engineering genius allowing them to perform maneuvers that would have crushed any ordinary aircraft. The Germans, trained for dogfighting with nimble fighters, were shocked to find that the Thunderbolt could not only endure but dominate, absorbing hits, shrugging off near misses, and retaliating with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient. Tracers lit the sky like molten streaks of lightning, converging on targets with an unerring accuracy, while engines roared a thunderous accompaniment to the deadly ballet unfolding thousands of feet above the shattered earth below. The psychological effect on both sides was profound. German pilots, who had once prided themselves on agility and skill, found themselves grappling with fear, frustration, and disbelief. Their tactics were rendered ineffective, their formations vulnerable, and their perception of control shattered. Meanwhile, American pilots grew steadily more confident, their mastery of the Thunderbolt evident in every maneuver, every target engaged. There was a rhythm to the battle, a deadly music where wings flexed, propellers whined, bullets tore air and metal alike, and human courage met engineering perfection. Each Mustang that returned from a skirmish carried not only the pilot, but the knowledge that the Luftwaffe's supremacy was no longer guaranteed, that the P-47 had irrevocably altered the rules of engagement, and that the skies now belonged to those who could harness its incredible power. By the end of the engagement, the battlefield above Europe resembled a storm of smoke, fire, and falling debris. German pilots were forced to retreat, their formations decimated, their confidence shaken, and their strategy exposed as vulnerable against a plane that could absorb punishment, strike with devastating precision, and outmaneuver assumptions. The Thunderbolts, despite scratches, dents, and the toll of battle, returned to base with a sense of quiet triumph. Mechanics would later marvel at the resilience of the airframes. Pilots would recount the terrifying yet exhilarating sensation of commanding such power, and strategists would understand that air superiority had been redefined. The P-47 Thunderbolt had not just survived. It had dominated, rewritten the rules of aerial warfare, and delivered a lesson in the fusion of human courage, innovation, and engineering excellence that would echo for the remainder of the war. As engines wound down and pilots climbed out of their cockpits, the horizon was calm once more, but the memory of what had transpired above would linger. Smoke trails, flaming wrecks, the sudden silence after bursts of 50 caliber fury. The Luftwaffe's laughter had been replaced with awe and fear, and the legend of the P-47, the jug that could shrug off bullets and rain fire with terrifying efficiency, had been cemented in both American and German consciousness. The sky had been conquered not by speed alone, but by the combination of raw firepower, unmatched durability, and the precise orchestration of pilot and machine, a turning tide that no pilot would forget and no enemy could ignore. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the European battlefront, glinting off the armor and rivets of the P-47 Thunderbolts as they roared skyward in precise formations, engines vibrating with raw, lethal energy that seemed to electrify the very air around them. German pilots scrambled to respond, their Messerschmitts twisting and banking in attempts to intercept. Yet every evasive maneuver they had practiced for months, every acrobatic routine drilled into reflex, was met by the calculated, almost prescient responses of the Thunderbolt pilots. These weren't merely aircraft. They were engineered manifestations of destruction, blending brute force, aerodynamic mastery, and pilot skill into a machine capable of rewriting the rules of engagement. Clouds stretched across the horizon like vast, shifting battlegrounds, offering concealment but also danger, as the Thunderbolts navigated with a confidence that seemed to mock nature itself, flexing wings under the strain of gravity-defying maneuvers while maintaining their lethal trajectory toward enemy formations. As the skirmish intensified, tracers arced like molten streaks through the sky, converging on enemy fighters with a precision that appeared almost supernatural. Every pilot was a conductor of fire, every pull of the trigger a note in a deadly symphony orchestrated by engineering genius and human courage. German aircraft, agile though they were, could not match the combination of speed, armor, and firepower that the Thunderbolts brought to bear. Each burst from the .850 caliber gun shredded fuselage, ripped wings, and sent spiraling plumes of smoke trailing toward the earth below, as if the very atmosphere had been rewritten by the fury of the Jug. Pilots felt the weight of battle in every vibration of the airframe, the subtle flex of wings distributing stress across the craft like a living organism responding to the rhythm of combat, absorbing punishment that would have crippled lesser machines, allowing them to maintain speed, maneuverability, and deadly accuracy. The Germans were forced into defensive patterns, breaking their formations in desperation, their morale fraying with each devastating pass. The Thunderbolts, massive yet nimble, carved through the sky with an authority that erased hesitation. Dive after dive, roll after roll, each maneuver demonstrating not only the aircraft's raw capability, but the training, courage, and unspoken synergy between pilot and machine. The sun glinted off armor-piercing rounds, tracer fire, and polished aluminum, illuminating the chaos and horror of aerial warfare in a way that was almost poetic. Beauty forged in destruction, precision crafted in the furnace of war. Each P-47 pilot became a master of calculated aggression, reading enemy movements, anticipating reactions, and exploiting every weakness in formations that once seemed invincible. Amid the thunder of engines, the crackle of tracers, and the occasional explosion that lit the clouds like firework blossoms, the psychological shift was undeniable. Fear replaced arrogance in the Luftwaffe ranks. Awe and terror mixed as pilots realized that agility alone would not guarantee survival. The Thunderbolt's combination of endurance, armor, and firepower had turned conventional tactics upside down, forcing enemy pilots into reactive desperation while the Americans maintained control, dictating the pace, the engagement, and ultimately the outcome. Even the most experienced German aces found themselves outmaneuvered not merely by pilot skill, but by the P-47's engineered advantage. Wings that absorbed punishment, engines that climbed through storms, and guns that tore apart both aircraft and confidence alike. By the time the engagement drew to a close, the sky above Europe was a testament to the destructive harmony of human intellect and machine ingenuity. Smoke plumes from destroyed fighters twisted in the thermals, while Thunderbolts, engines still humming with residual power, returned to base with wings scratched but spirits unbroken. Mechanics would later marvel at the resilience of each airframe, pilots would recount near-mythical maneuvers, and commanders would take note that the balance of air superiority had shifted irrevocably. The P-47 Thunderbolt had not just survived the storm, it had imposed its will upon it, turning the chaos of battle into an arena where engineering precision, firepower, and human skill combined to dominate, leaving both allies and enemies to witness a new chapter in the history of aerial combat. As the sun sank behind distant ridges, painting clouds with fire and gold, pilots climbed from their cockpits. Silent nods exchanged between men who understood that victory in the sky was no longer a matter of chance. It was the result of relentless innovation, rigorous training, and the terrifying might of a machine designed not only to fight, but to reshape the battlefield. In the quiet moments, with engines cooling and the wind settling, the legend of the Thunderbolt continued to grow, a symbol of engineering audacity, a testament to the fusion of courage and technology, and a warning to any who dared underestimate it. The battlefield had been dominated not just by fire, but by a relentless, almost artistic command of the skies that ensured the P-47 would be remembered not as a fighter, but as a force that changed air warfare forever. As twilight crept over the European front, shadows stretched across fields, forests, and shattered towns, painting the war-torn landscape with an eerie calm that belied the violence still echoing above. The P-47 Thunderbolt's engines throbbing like coiled lightning sliced through the last beams of daylight, their polished fuselages reflecting crimson streaks of sunset, a visual symphony of menace and mastery. German pilots, weary from relentless sorties, scanned the sky with a mixture of disbelief and rising dread. The very air seemed dominated by these colossal machines. Their presence impossible to ignore, their trajectory inevitable. The Thunderbolts moved with methodical grace, each maneuver a blend of brute power and aerodynamic finesse, exploiting height advantage, speed, and tactical formations to control every inch of airspace. Clouds, previously considered concealment, now became the stage for a terrifying ballet of calculated aggression as tracers arced like molten ribbons, converging with surgical precision on enemy formations. The Germans, once confident in their agile Messerschmitts, found themselves pushed to reactive extremes. Their acrobatics, twists, and dives were anticipated, countered, and neutralized by the Thunderbolt's pilots, who had learned to read the sky like a chessboard. Every burst from the 850 caliber guns created a shockwave of fear, shredding fuselage and wing alike, leaving trails of smoke and fire in spiraling arcs that marked both destruction and dominance. Thunderbolts absorbed flak and damage with remarkable resilience, their armored skins and robust airframes turning what should have been a moment of vulnerability into a calculated advantage. Pilots felt the air pulse against their wings, the vibrations carrying the story of engineering foresight and battle-hardened skill. Even as enemy aircraft attempted to flee or regroup, the Thunderbolts dictated the tempo, enforcing a deadly rhythm that left no room for improvisation. Nightfall deepened, and the battlefield transformed into a surreal theater of shadows, fire, and echoes. Moonlight glimmered on wing edges, casting ghostly silhouettes as tracers lit the darkness with violent brilliance. Each Mustang moved with lethal choreography, diving into enemy formations, climbing steeply, rolling with precision. Every movement a calculated interplay of stress management, lift distribution, and concentrated firepower. German pilots experienced an unfamiliar sensation, a creeping inevitability, the realization that their enemies' machines were not merely aircraft but engineered predators, instruments of methodical and overwhelming destruction. The sound of 8 synchronized 50 caliber guns became the herald of doom, the auditory signature of a weapon system that had changed the rules of air combat, merging technology and human skill into an unstoppable force. As smoke and fire traced arcs across the heavens, the psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was unmistakable. Pilots who had once prided themselves on audacity now found themselves grasping for survival, calculating every turn and escape in a sky where dominance had been seized by superior engineering and relentless training. The Thunderbolts' endurance allowed them to outlast enemy fuel limits. Their armor absorbed what would have been fatal punishment, and their firepower transformed engagement into annihilation rather than contest. Observers on the ground could see plumes of destruction spiraling skyward, the silent testimony of P-47 supremacy, and hear the distant roar of engines that carried pilots through clouds, wind, and chaos, returning them home even as they left devastation in their wake. By the end of the sortie, the battlefield bore the imprint of calculated devastation. Debris twirled gently downward, smoke mingled with the cool night air, and pilots returned with wings scratched but intact, engines cooling, adrenaline still surging. The impact was not merely physical, it was psychological, strategic, and symbolic. Every destroyed fighter, every shredded wing, every whirling plume of smoke underscored a stark truth. The P-47 Thunderbolt had redefined aerial combat. It had transformed what was once an arena of chance and dogfighting bravado into a domain of technological supremacy, tactical discipline, and engineered lethality. German pilots would recount the night in silence, haunted by the memory of a sky dominated by 8 guns firing with relentless precision, by wings that defied destruction, by a machine that had turned arrogance into fear. As the darkness settled fully, the Thunderbolts glided home, engines fading to a low, satisfied hum. Mechanics would inspect wings bent yet unbroken. Pilots would recount maneuvers executed flawlessly under extreme conditions, and commanders would adjust strategy with newfound respect for the machine and its operators. The P-47 had survived nightfall, had asserted dominance, and had changed the air war forever. A blend of power, resilience, and firepower that no enemy could ignore. A legend in motion across clouds and shadows. The final suspense lingered like a pulse in the night. Dominance in the sky had shifted irreversibly, and the Thunderbolt had etched its terrifying, beautiful mark into history. The first light of dawn stretched slowly over the war-torn landscapes of Europe, spilling gold and violet across shattered towns, smoke-streaked forests, and rivers glinting like molten silver. The P-47 Thunderbolt sat on the tarmac, engines idling with a low, resonant hum, each plane reflecting the early sun like a sentinel poised for battle. For the pilots, today's sortie was more than another mission. It was the culmination of lessons hard-earned through fire, steel, and fear, the embodiment of relentless engineering married to human skill. As the first Thunderbolt rolled forward, its propeller spinning to life with a predatory growl, the pilots felt the wings, armored yet precise, flex beneath their hands, a tangible reminder of why these machines had turned laughter into disbelief, mockery into terror. The sky, once a domain of dueling aces and fleeting advantage, now belonged to the Thunderbolts, a domain defined by 8 synchronized 50-caliber guns capable of reshaping air combat itself. Ascending into the early morning clouds, the pilots experienced the full poetry of controlled power, wings flexing imperceptibly, lifting with calculated elegance, distributing stress across every rivet and panel while engines propelled them higher, faster, more confidently than any of their adversaries had imagined possible. Every maneuver was a conversation with physics itself, each turn, dive, and climb a test of precision, resilience, and trust in the metal that carried them. Below, the Luftwaffe scrambled in disarray, their nimble fighters, once symbols of dominance, now reduced to prey under the Thunderbolt's calculated assault. Tracers arced through the sky like molten ribbons of inevitability, every burst leaving fire, smoke, and silence in its wake. Pilots witnessed the tangible consequences of power combined with foresight. Wings withstood punishment that would have felled lesser planes, engines roared against wind and gravity, and the synchronized 50s delivered devastation with unerring accuracy. The psychological weight of dominance pressed on the enemy. Once proud German pilots, skilled in dogfighting and aerial agility, now faced the sobering reality that their tactics were inadequate against machines that absorbed punishment, delivered relentless fire, and returned their pilots home unscathed. The battlefield above and below became a canvas of chaos and calculation. Flaming wreckage spiraled to the earth, smoke twisted skyward in tendrils, and every surviving Thunderbolt carried the echo of hundreds of calculated engagements. Every maneuver a lesson etched in air and metal. Ground observers, too, saw the effect. Ruined aircraft littering fields, the telltale smoke of engines and fuel, and the disciplined arcs of return as pilots brought their machines home. Wings bending under stress yet unbroken. As the mission concluded, Thunderbolts returned to base, engines winding down, propellers slowing with a rhythmic hum that seemed almost reverent. Pilots climbed out, faces smeared with soot and sweat, but eyes alight with awe and satisfaction, knowing they had flown machines that were more than metal, that were instruments of inevitability, embodiments of strategy, engineering, and courage. Mechanics traced fingers along wings that had bent and flexed, noting every scar as proof of resilience while commanders recorded data, understanding that the Thunderbolt had permanently altered the calculus of aerial warfare. It was not just a victory of firepower, it was a testament to design, innovation, and human determination. The final suspense lingered even as engines cooled. The P-47 Thunderbolt had redefined air supremacy. It had turned mockery into awe, fear into inevitability, and the very sky into a battlefield where the laws of physics, strategy, and courage converged in an unstoppable symphony. German pilots would remember these flights in nightmares and whispers, haunted by the roar of engines and the relentless arcs of 850 caliber guns that had reshaped the heavens. And in that silence after combat, the Thunderbolts rested, wings gleaming in the dawn, a silent, enduring monument to ingenuity, audacity, and the unyielding power of human design. The ultimate reminder that the sky, once contested, had been decisively claimed.